Welcome to Guns, Gear, and Guns with Gary Gunderson. I am Gary Gunderson. I figured I would talk about the firearms that appeared in the new All Quiet on the Western Front adaptation and give a quick review of this version of the famous story. And spoilers for the nearly 100-year-old story, but some people may not know what happens if you have not caught the new film on Netflix yet. The Gewehr 98 is the most prevalent firearm in the film, carried by every German soldier I saw. Online, others have claimed they saw a 98AZ and a K98 somewhere in the crowds of troops, but they must be more eagle-eyed than I am because I did not see any other rifle carried by the Germans. If you saw some, please let me know in the comments and when you saw them, even if some of the bayonets were a little rubbery. I would not be surprised if the production did use some other rifles to try and cheat to fill out numbers with the belief that people wouldn't notice or they would be out of focus in the background. We see them carrying, firing, and cleaning the rifle throughout the film, and though they talk about how being dirty could cause it to fail, they never pay off that comment even though they are put in the muck and mud quite a bit. You get a good look at this rifle throughout, including the Longevizier sights or so-called roller coaster sights on the rifle. This example was made in 1918, chambered in 8mm Mauser. These were issued in the First World War for Germany in the millions and was the most common rifle for the German army. These are stripper clip fed with an internal 5-round magazine. You can see the guides for the stripper clips and a groove for your thumb to help load the stripper clips into the top of the receiver here. This Mauser action is cock on open, and you may have noticed the bayonets mount without a muzzle ring. The ones appearing in the film were the 9805 version of the bayonet. The only 9805 I have is a sawback or so-called butcher bayonet, so just imagine it without the saw teeth. As you can see, the long rifle and long bayonet give you quite a bit of reach for hand-to-hand combat. It has a standard Mauser flag safety, and even though it is a long rifle, it does have a bit more recoil than you see in the movie. I didn't even realize he shot it here at first. The French soldiers all appeared to have 3-shot Berthier rifles, probably the 0715s. Berthiers were the most commonly issued rifle for the French in the First World War. You don't get a good look at them like you do the Gewehr 98s here. You only see them in flashes or just from the muzzle up being carried on the shoulders most of the time. But you can tell from the pot-bellied stock and the hole in the bottom that you see from time to time in the film that's there for the in-block clips. Chambered in 8mm Lebel, the 3-round in-block clips are inserted as one packet or item into the rifle, with the clip acting as the feed lips for the ammo as you run the action. Once the last round is fired, the clip falls out of the bottom of the rifle. There is no up or down direction on these clips, and they can be inserted in either direction. This does generally give a quicker reload, as thumbing in rounds via stripper clips would probably take more time, but the 3-round limit compared to 5 rounds is certainly a drawback. The hole in the bottom of the rifle is also a way for dirt and debris to enter the rifle and cause problems. This example is a Berthier M16 and includes an upgrade that was done to these rifles which allowed for the use of 5-round in-block clips, and also a spring-loaded cover for the hole on the bottom of the firearm. Though I did not see this version show up in the film, which is a bit of a surprise since it was literally the end of the war in the movie, I think it's an interesting detail in the evolution of this rifle that's worth noting. The Berthier does not have a safety, but it does have a clip release button to pop up your in-block clip out with the ammo if you need to unload it safely for any reason. The Berthier did have its own bayonet, which was a blade style, but the Berthier 0715s were able to accept the standard Lebel bayonet, which is cruciform. I've watched it a few times, and I'm still not sure what was used to kill Paul at the end of the movie. It could be either. It looks cruciform when it pops out of his chest, but it looks more like a blade when the soldier is running away, so I'm not 100% sure. I only have the label bayonet, but you can see how it attaches and how long this thing is. This example has an all-metal handle and an interesting attach method, and putting the rifles side by side, both are quite long with fixed bayonets, and though the Gewehr 98 is about 5 foot 3 inches, the Berthier ends up being right at 6 feet long. Here their butts are lined up, and you can see the difference in length very clearly. The only real pistol I saw was a French ruby, or at least a copy of a ruby, which Paul and the French soldier fight over briefly. The rubies were purchased by France out of Spain and were manufactured and copied by a variety of factories and small shops that were accepted into French military service. They are simple blowback pistols chambered in 32 ACP with 9 rounds of magazine capacity, which is removed with a release on the heel of the pistol. The operation is also very simple, with the safety pulling double duty and acting as the slide release. As far as machine guns go, sorry I don't have any in my personal collection to show off in more detail, but there's a Hotchkiss used by the French, which you can see pretty clearly since they use the feed strips instead of belts, and the Germans and French both use Maxim machine guns, I believe, as well. On to my review of the film. First off, the battle scenes are fantastic. They are, on the most part, dynamic and interesting, showing some really good combat, highlighting the horrifying nature of fighting along the Western Front in the First World War. My only criticisms for this part of the film are admittedly my own nitpicks, like how rifles appeared to have no recoil, and a few cliche things like during the opening, our focus is on one soldier and then it pans up as another is exiting the trench. Well, he's obviously going to get shot. And of course, he does. I think the scenes with the armistice negotiations were well done, and I think they were trying to add another dramatic element to the story, a ticking clock of sorts, since so many of the characters are still alive in this version with days left before the war ends, and they quickly all die out instead of gradually over the course of the war. But I would rather have cut this completely. The focus of the story is really about Paul and his friends during the war, and this bigger picture view takes away from that. Also, it feels a little bit like the, oh, he's 2 weeks away from retirement cliche. Well, now you know they're going to die. I feel the same way with the scenes focusing on the general. They make him almost a literal mustache twirling villain, forcing the soldiers into one final charge with 15 minutes left until the armistice. And I think there's a lot to be said about the leadership during the First World War and how they kept just feeding soldiers into the meat grinder. But again, that's a separate story. The story is really about the horrors of warfare, the camaraderie soldiers feel amongst themselves, and the isolation they feel from the civilian populace. Amongst others, this adaptation sacrificed the scenes where Paul returns home on leave and ends up wanting to go back to the front line since it made more sense to him, and he was called a coward when he tries to describe how the war really is. And I think those would have been better scenes. There's not supposed to be an actual villain within the story. You can boil the whole thing down to the violence and humanity you see in Paul when he starts to dress the wounds of the Frenchman in the shell hole whom he just stabbed minutes ago. It is supposed to show the shared suffering both sides face, and just like Kat said, no one really wants it, they're just there. I also don't like the change to Kat's death at the hands of the farmer's son. This makes his death directly because of his actions, revenge for stealing from the farmers, instead of the original story where it's a random piece of shrapnel. It was also very obvious as soon as they went back to the farmhouse what was going to happen, and I think it serves the story better with the original version of his death. Overall, I do like the film. It is well done, well shot, well acted. I also just think it would have been better if they did not condense everything into a few days at the end of the war and instead there was some progression from rookie to veteran, like in the original story. I guess to sum up, other than the really good battle scenes, I think the changes they made to the story were almost exclusively detriments instead of improvements. I understand why they did it, as it makes it simpler and reduces the number of scenes and number of battles. And you have to make choices like that in any adaptation, but I think there's something to be said about making a bunch of changes to a classic story. Unless, of course, you are doing an all dog version of the story, in which case, sure, make all the changes you want, because you could never make this again today due to the treatment of animals. This is from So Quiet on the Canine Front, a comedy that was released in the 30s, and it is wild. You can find it online if you want. Anyways, those are some of the firearms of and my thoughts on All Quiet on the Western Front. What did you think of this adaptation? Did you spy any other firearms somewhere that I missed? Let me know in the comments below. If you're new here, please subscribe, like the video, and share it with your friends. Thanks for watching.